Chapter 2. The next day, Elizabeth stood on the platform as the train came in. She stood to one side of the door, leaving room for those getting off. She shook her head in annoyance as a crowd of people wanting to get on the train hindered those trying to get off. Some people really are sheep. And sometimes I think real sheep have more sense than humans, Elizabeth thought to herself. A moment later, her phone vibrated in her pocket. A message came up displayed on the lenses of her sunglasses. It said, "Meet me in carriage A, Professor Roberts." Elizabeth waited for the pushing and shoving crowd to fade away. She then climbed up into the train just before it started to move and made her way down the carriages. She got on carriage C, then made her way into carriage B, squeezing around people who were putting their luggage away and other people who didn't seem to know which way to go. She got to the end of carriage B, where there was a sign saying, "Carriage a first class." She shook her head in confusion. That can't be right, Elizabeth thought to herself. She got the text message back up on her lenses again and confirmed that it was indeed carriage A. She made her way through the carriage and almost straight away she saw Professor Roberts leaning back in his chair with his eyes closed. She made her way up to the chair on the other side of the table from him. "Good morning, Professor. How are you?" The professor opened one bloodshot eye and then closed it again before saying, "Greetings, my dear, but whether or not it is a good day is yet to be seen." "Did we have a rather late night, Professor?" said Elizabeth, chuckling. She sat down, and then, a few minutes later, she rocked slightly as the train accelerated out of the station on its way to London. "My dear, I probably should let you know," said the professor, continuing to lean back in his chair with his eyes closed. "I dropped Jacob an email this morning. I've just let him know that I'll be willing to transfer £10,000 for my share in the business venture as part of its startup capital, as well as a rough summary of what we discussed yesterday." Elizabeth winced. "Professor, that's an awful lot of money. I'm not sure I can contribute the same amount." Elizabeth hated herself for not being able to contribute as much. "Don't worry, that is okay, my dear," said the professor. "How much do you think you can contribute? However, bear in mind that I know we are going to try and get outside investors and use some of those things Jacob spoke about yesterday, but we are going to need some startup capital to get the ball rolling. Off the top of my head, I'm not entirely sure, but about £5,000 maybe," said Elizabeth, still blushing. The professor opened one eye slightly. "It's nothing to get angry about," he said, completely misunderstanding. "I'm not angry, Professor, at least not at the money or anything else. It's more at myself, really. I like to be able to pull my own weight," said Elizabeth. The professor reached across the table and patted the back of her hand before then saying, "5,000 should be enough," he then continued. "So, my dear, don't get so upset. We will be put through more than enough trials to prove how much weight we can pull. Anyway, I've worked with you for years and I'm fully aware that you do pull your own weight and much more." Just at that moment, Elizabeth got another message that started scrawling across the inside of the lenses of her sunglasses. "Have you seen the professor's message? £10,000. "Does the professor think we have money to burn?" said Jacob in his message. Elizabeth smiled. "I've just had a message back from Jacob, and I think he has the same problem as me." "Okay, how much can he contribute?" said the professor. "I'll ask him," said Elizabeth. With her sunglasses still on, she looked down at the tabletop through her glasses. Glasses. Display keyboard. On the table in front of her, a full-size keyboard appeared, using the augmented reality capabilities of her glasses. She started typing away, replying to the message Jacob had sent her. The message appeared on the lenses of her sunglasses above the keyboard, as if she was sitting at a computer with a monitor in front of her as she typed. The professor shook his head. "I'll never get used to that. It just looks so wrong. People just typing in mid-air without anything there is just not right." "Good. I think I've sorted it now," said Elizabeth several messages later. "We are going to try and contribute £5,000 each for 20% of the company. Unfortunately, Professor, we are going to have to water down your shares to be worth half of what me and Jacob are investing so we can all have equal ownership. That leaves 40% left for any potential investors and gives us a controlling majority. Tell Jacob to hold off on finalising that just in case, said the Professor. Why? You are not upset about the watering down of your shares, are you? Me and Jacob could also have our shares watered down if necessary as well, said Elizabeth with a little bit of concern in her voice. Not at all, my dear, said the Professor, patting the back of her hand. It is just in case we need to modify anything if we have any problems with the people we want to join the team. Elizabeth passed on his message and then got a reply. He said he will try to hold off on it as long as possible, but he does need to get the ball rolling. I understand, and I'm sure he will do his best, said the Professor. Sometime later, the train pulled into London Euston Station. The pair of them stood up and made their way off the train while being knocked repeatedly in the hustle and bustle. They joined the even bigger crowds going this way and that inside the station. Where are we meeting your friend? Said the Professor. Let's just get out of the station first, said Elizabeth, as she was being knocked and jostled. She tried to keep up with the Professor, and they got on the escalator standing to the right, out of the way of the people barging past. This is why I hate coming to London, said Elizabeth as she got knocked again. It's such a rat race here. People are rushing around like headless chickens. A tall man was leaning against the wall as he watched an old man and a young girl get off at the top of the escalators. He then watched them try and make their way across the concourse and out of the station. He peeled away from the wall and slipped into the crowd, disappearing in mere moments. Elizabeth and the Professor stood outside again. Elizabeth put her hand up to shield her eyes from the bright sunlight as someone bumped into her again, causing her to grind her teeth in annoyance. She pointed across the road with the arm that she'd been using to shield her eyes. Over there, that's UCL, and we should be meeting Matthew just over there, Elizabeth said, as she pointed at a coffee shop on the other side of the road and a bit further down from the university. Elizabeth and the Professor made their way through the flow of humanity as they crossed the road and sat down at a table just outside the cafe. A waitress came up to the table and asked them, "Can I take your order, please?" "Hello," Elizabeth said, smiling. "Can I have a Pepsi, please?" "May I have a coffee, milk, and 2 sugars, please?" said the Professor. "No problem. Would you like anything with that?" said the waitress. Elizabeth glanced at the Professor, who shook his head slightly. "No, thank you, that's everything," said Elizabeth. "That's wonderful, said the waitress, cut off abruptly as she was pushed aside by a young man who sat down at the table. "And I'll have a Pepsi," said the young man. "Hello, Matthew," said Elizabeth, trying to keep the distaste out of her voice. "Yes, sir, I'll be back with all of your order shortly," said the waitress before darting off. "Matthew, this is Professor Cameron Roberts," said Elizabeth. "He's a professor of astronautical engineering at the University of Cambridge." "Oh, hi, Professor. I'm Dr. Matthew Brown," he said in a crisp upper-class accent. Matthew crossed his arms over his chest and leaned back in his chair, rocking back and forth on the 2 back legs. "Hello, Dr. Brown. I have heard many things about you," said the Professor. "I'm quite sure you have," said Matthew, smirking. Just then, the waitress came back and handed them their drinks. "Thank you," said Elizabeth and the Professor. Matthew just nodded. "So, as good as it is to see you again," said Matthew, "what do you want with me?" Despite the lovely day, the blue sky and the sun's warm rays shining down on them, Elizabeth's stomach clenched, and she felt sick and repulsed having to talk to Matthew, but he was brilliant. Elizabeth glanced at the Professor, but the Professor nodded slightly back at her. "It's your show, my dear," said the Professor. Elizabeth looked towards Matthew. "How much did you hear about the new space plane?" "Huh, talk about the irony there. One of the best advances in space technology and most of the orders get cancelled, and not only that, but a bomb goes off as well," said Matthew, laughing and flicking his fingers in the air, doing a half-hearted impression of an explosion. "You're right, it is ironic," said Elizabeth, "but I suspect we think for different reasons. she thought to herself before continuing out loud. We also think it's wrong, and something should be done about it. Ha ha! Ha ha ha! What do you think you could do? Said Matthew sneeringly. Just because the price has come down significantly to get to orbit, it doesn't mean anything. We have had the capability of getting to orbit since the late 50s. Everyone knows that as well. That's most of the problem. Once you get beyond Earth's orbit, you're halfway to anywhere else in the solar system. Elizabeth's temper flared. She bolted forward before she realized what she was doing. Then she slowly got herself back under control, sat back in her chair, and said, I know we have an uphill struggle. More like the torment of Tantalus, and that doesn't even take into account the dangers of the lunatics trying to blow things up, said Matthew. You're right, and I know it seems like a hopeless task, Elizabeth said dejectedly. Elizabeth saw the professor stiffen in his chair out of the corner of her eye. She then sat forward, but more calmly this time, towards Matthew. But we still want to try anyway, and what's more, we want you to help us. What makes you think I'm going to help you in this insane endeavour? Said Matthew scornfully. I know you like a challenge. And I know you like to prove that you're better than everyone else, she added to herself silently. Well, yes, you do have a point there, I suppose, said Matthew musing, but I need to know more. I need to know that we might actually have a snowball's chance in hell, and that I'm going to get something out of it, especially for putting a target on my back, and especially because you do realise that is exactly what you're doing to yourself. Elizabeth opened her satchel and got out some paper and a pen, sliding them all across the table over to Matthew. Before we go any further, I'm going to have to ask you to sign this, she said. It's just a typical non-disclosure agreement. And Matthew raised an eyebrow and looked down at the document before starting to read. Elizabeth and the professor glanced at each other before returning their attention to Matthew. A few moments later, he looked up. Are you being serious? Why, what's wrong? Said Elizabeth. It's just a typical non-disclosure agreement. The charges are a bit ridiculous and even resulting in prison time, said Matthew. Are you really being serious? Elizabeth shrugged. Well, don't sign anything. Then there won't be any problems. Matthew smiled tightly. Well, I suppose it is that simple. He grumbled a bit while he signed the agreement. Here you go. Here is your damn non-disclosure agreement, he said, snarling. Matthew pushed the documents back to Elizabeth so forcefully the pen nearly went off the side of the table, and he nearly knocked over a few of the drinks as well, if it hadn't been for Elizabeth catching the pen with her arm and some of the drinks with her hand. While she was doing that, the professor managed to catch the papers and get them out of the way. Come on then, Matthew said. Let me know the deep, dark secrets that could send me to prison in shackles. So far there are the three of us, said Elizabeth, ignoring Matthew's comments, and we decided yesterday when we heard about the spaceplane news that we were going to do something about it. And you came to me. I feel so honoured, said Matthew, rocking slightly in his chair. When we heard about this travesty with the new spaceplane, said Elizabeth, continuing after Matthew's interruption, but not without rolling her eyes first, we decided that we were going to take humanity back to the moon. I beg your pardon, said Matthew, nearly spitting out his drink. We haven't been back to the moon in over 50 years. He coughed and spluttered a bit while banging on his chest. Yes, I'm being very serious, said Elizabeth, calmly but intensely. We will go back to the moon. You're mad, said Matthew. What makes you think you have any chance? You know as well as I do that we have the technological capability, and what's more, we've had it for quite some time, said Elizabeth. Join us, and come along for the ride and find out, said Elizabeth, shrugging. Matthew just stared at her and then said, Is that it? That's all you're getting for now, said Elizabeth calmly. If that's it, I've had an offer from DDT to be a head researcher, said Matthew, with so much sarcasm it almost dripped from his mouth. With several teams under me, a pick of my own projects, and an almost unlimited budget. That compared against your offer? Sorry, but the answer is a resounding no. However, I do appreciate your most gracious offer to join your band of merry men. Matthew stood up. As always, Elizabeth, it is a pleasure to see you, but please try not to get yourself blown up or something equally as stupid in this mad endeavour. He nodded in the professor's direction. Professor, a pleasure. He then turned around, not even waiting for a response from the professor, before walking off back towards the university. A few minutes went by in silence before the professor finally broke it. God, I'm relieved that arrogant little shit didn't join us, he said, sighing. That isn't the worst I've ever seen, and quite frankly, he can be far worse, said Elizabeth. But he is brilliant, and even though it's difficult to work with him, it would have been a boon to have him on the team. Honestly, I find that hard to believe, said the professor. Oh, believe it. He really is brilliant, and he would let you know every chance he gets, said Elizabeth. They sat in silence for a bit, finishing their drinks and enjoying the lovely summer day. Dr. Brown made his way into the university and up several floors to a deserted lecture room. He got his phone out and weighed it in his hand for a few seconds, then selected a number he'd only recently been given. It rang just once before he started to speak. It's Dr. Matthew Brown. I don't know if it's going to be useful, but there is a new group that wants to try and get to the moon. I don't know if the group is worth taking seriously, but the person leading it does need taking seriously. Jacob was back out on the hill where he and Elizabeth had been the night before, and leaning against a rail looking out over the university. He glanced up and down the hill and realised he was actually quite alone there. He watched the students, lecturers, and various other people going about their business. He was also soaking up the heat and beauty of the bright summer day and its amazing clear blue sky, but he knew that he was just putting off the tasks he needed to do. Well, I'd better get on with it, Jacob said, sighing. He got his phone out and rang a number. The phone rang several times, and Jacob thought it was going to go to the answer machine before a distracted voice answered it. No, not there. Go back over there and read through that statement again. Sorry about that. You've reached Simon, Houston and Locke solicitors, and you're talking to Simon Stokes. Hi, Simon, it's Jacob. Sorry it's been a while. Jacob, good to hear from you. How are you doing? Said Simon. I'm good, thanks. And I've just started a pretty interesting project, which I actually need your help with. I'll get onto that in a minute, but first of all, how are you doing as well? Said Jacob. Really? Okay, I'll go along with this for now, Simon said cautiously. I'm generally quite good. You may have heard when I answered the phone that I was somewhat distracted at first. Yeah, I heard, said Jacob. It's a good kind of busy, though. Plenty of work, which is pretty good because, as we all know, more work means more money, said Simon, chuckling. Anyway, you said there was an interesting project you were doing. I would love to catch up properly sometime, but for now I'll get down to business, because at the moment, time is most definitely money. I'll try not to take up too much of your time then, said Jacob. I would prefer it to be you, or at least someone you would recommend. But I need someone who has a background in corporate law, specifically British, American, and European law. If they've got a background, or at least a hobby in space law, that would be ideal. Space law, that has piqued my interest, said Simon. Can you tell me any more? Sorry, not at the moment. Maybe, though, when we catch up properly next, said Jacob. Fair enough. I'm sorry to say at the moment I can't help you directly, but there might be a guy I know. He's a bit young, however, and doesn't have a great deal of experience, Simon said hesitantly. Okay. Is there no one else better? Jacob said. Sorry, no one else I can think of who's got a background in space law, said Simon. Okay, send me his contact details and I'll get in touch with him, said Jacob. Is there anything else I can do for you before I rush off? Simon said. Yeah, there is one last thing. Do you know anyone who is good at lobbying, both here, in Europe, and the States? Said Jacob hopefully. No, I'm afraid I don't know anyone who is qualified in all three areas, said Simon. But I do have someone in each of the three places that I think would be good for you, especially if you want them to do lobbying for changes in space law. Okay, thanks for that. If you pass me their details as well, and we'll see where we go from there, said Jacob. Is that everything? Said Simon. Yes, I think that is everything for now, said Jacob. Okay, I'll send you those details right now, said Simon. And just then a chime let Jacob know he had just received the message. Thanks for that. And sorry for taking up your time. When you've got more free time, we'll have to catch up and have a few drinks, said Jacob. Love to. Sounds good to me. Take care of yourself and try and stay out of trouble, said Simon. I'll do what I can, said Jacob, laughing. He ended the call and then went to the first contact in the message Simon had sent him. Selecting the contact information, he then called that one as well. His call was answered by someone who sounded very young. Hello, Nathan Watts speaking. How may I help you? Hi, Nathan. My name is Jacob. I was given your contact details by Simon Stokes. He said you were the guy to go to for corporate law and space law, said Jacob. Wow, okay, yeah, that's me and some of my specialties, said Nathan, surprised. Would you be available to meet for a job interview? Said Jacob. A job interview? Are you serious? It would depend on where you want to meet. I don't really have anything going on at the moment, said Nathan. Yes, seriously. Where do you want to meet? Said Jacob. Well, I'm actually up at the university as it's my sister's graduation, said Nathan. Okay, that works for me. How would you like to meet at the student union then? Said Jacob. Sure, I'll be there in an hour if that's all right, said Nathan. Brilliant, I'll meet you then, said Jacob. He put the phone down and looked at the other 3 contacts his friend had sent him. Lobbyists, lawyers and accountants. What have I done to deserve this? Said Jacob to himself. But we still have to see about an accountant. Oh boy. He looked out over the campus, again enjoying the view of life passing by. He wanted to go to space and get humans out there as much as Elizabeth wanted, but he also loved this world. There was nothing more beautiful to him than the blue sky, amazing sunrises and sunsets, forests, woods, rainforests, plains, savannas, deserts, hills, mountains, seas and oceans. All of it was just amazing. That wasn't even taking into account the amazing flora and fauna in this world that he felt privileged to call his home. He sighed again and turned away from the scenery with an almost painful degree of willpower, and then made his way down the hill and towards the student union. Half an hour later, Jacob was sitting at a table in the student union having a beer. At that moment, a young man dressed in a suit came into the student union and had a look around. The sight was that comical that the volume of talking in the student union actually went down slightly for a moment or two. The young man was amazingly thin and dressed in a suit that looked 2 sizes too big for him. The whole image made him look like a schoolboy dressed in his father's suit, and the pale complexion didn't do anything to help this image. Jacob put his hand in the air and waved towards the young boy. After a moment, he noticed Jacob and made his way over to his table. "Hello, are you Jacob?" said the young boy. "Yes, that's me. And I assume you're Nathan," said Jacob. "Indeed, that's me," said Nathan. "It's a pleasure to meet you in person," said Jacob, shaking Nathan's hand. "Go and grab yourself a beer, then pull up here," said Jacob, gesturing to the bar with his bottle of beer. "Will do," said Nathan, almost coming to attention and nodding. He turned back towards the bar and weaved in and out of the tables and chairs. Jacob watched as Nathan asked the barman for something, and the barman obviously didn't want to give it to him. Jacob watched Nathan shake his head in obvious annoyance. He got something out of his pocket and handed it to the barman. He looked at it very carefully, then at Nathan as well. The barman seemed surprised, and Jacob heard him laugh over the sound in the room. The barman then walked off and brought back drinks. He picked the drinks up, paid the barman, and made his way back to Jacob's table, then sat down in the chair across from him. Jacob took a long swig of his beer. Nathan opened one of his beers and put the second one in the middle of the table. The pair of them didn't say anything for a few moments. "Okay, I'm here now and all yours, at least for a bit," said Nathan. "Okay, as this is an interview for a job, tell me this," said Jacob. "Why would Simon recommend you?" "Okay," said Nathan slowly. "As I understand it, you need someone who is very familiar with space law and, not to put too fine a point on it, even though I look young, I am good at what I do." "Confident in yourself, aren't you?" said Jacob, laughing. He leaned over and opened his satchel, getting out a piece of paper and a pen. He then passed them both over to Nathan. "This is just a standard non-disclosure form that we need you to sign before we go any further," said Jacob. Nathan picked up the sheet of paper and read through the agreement. "Wow, you're pretty serious," said Nathan, whistling. "Yes, we are very serious, because we believe that if we continue, we will be putting ourselves in harm's way. If you join us, so will you," said Jacob. "Okay, I want to know," said Nathan, signing the non-disclosure form. He then passed the pen and paper back to Jacob, who had a quick glance at it before he put it back in the satchel again. Jacob sat back in his chair and took a long swig of his beer while studying Nathan across the table. "Okay, it's time to go down the rabbit hole. We, meaning me and some of my friends, want to set up, probably, a private limited company with the intention of setting up a profitable and self-sustaining colony on the moon," said Jacob. "What? You're not being serious?" "You're pulling my leg, aren't you?" said Nathan. "No, I'm definitely not pulling your leg, and yes, I am very serious," said Jacob. "Right. Okay then. You were not joking and are serious," said Nathan, breathing out slowly and trying to absorb the information. "You do realise the odds of this actually succeeding are just mad?" "Well aware there are a lot of vested interests against us, but we're willing to try," said Jacob. "At the moment, we need 2 teams. I want to go into space, but I also want to stay on the Earth. I'm probably going to be head of the team that stays here on Earth for now," said Jacob. Okay, but what do you want me to do?" said Nathan. "I want you to help me set up a private limited company, assuming that's the best vehicle for us to use to make this succeed. Work out what laws need to be changed and how we're going to do a bit of lobbying so we can get them changed. Part of that is also getting the political clout and influence to help us, because a lot of people will be wanting to go against us. Lastly, getting the financial backing to pay for this endeavour," said Jacob. "You're going to need me to do a lot more than just that," said Nathan, slack-jawed. "Well, at the moment it's something of a work in progress. You are probably right, and we very well may need you to do more," said Jacob. "If this is going to succeed, you'll probably become a manager and have a legal team working beneath you, as well as possibly a team of lobbyists." "Do you have any other skills?" said Jacob. "I also did accounting at uni, but I'm not an accredited accountant, you understand," said Nathan. "Okay, that helps. Now the big question. What would you be willing to work for?" said Jacob. "Well, yeah, the big question," said Nathan, breathing out. "Well, it just so happens that I finished with the company I was with and got a rather nice bonus. So basically, I'll be able to work for free for the next few weeks, but I'm going to need a wage after that, and I would appreciate at least some back pay as well." "Okay, what about this then?" said Jacob. "If you wait and see where this madness goes, we'll hire you part-time at about £12 an hour. At the moment, a part-time job, I believe, is classed as anything up to 16 hours a week. If this thing takes off and you're still with us, we'll hire you full-time and put you on a proper salary as well. We will also issue you with a special type of preference share in the company, so that when it becomes profitable, you will earn a portion of those profits." "How does that sound to you?" said Jacob. "It sounds reasonable," said Nathan. "The thing is going to be seeing where the train wrecks are going to happen," said Nathan. "What do you mean?" said Jacob, frowning. "Well, if this doesn't become a train wreck, then you're going to create plenty of changes," said Nathan. "There is also something else I want. I'll be willing to work for free for the next few weeks because I want to see where this endeavour is going. I don't have much else better to do right now either. If you do succeed, what are your goals?" "Long term, we are going to create a permanent moon base," said Jacob. "Does that include its own sovereignty and making its own laws?" said Nathan. "It might do," said Jacob. "Well, if it does become independent, I want to help create its laws," said Nathan determinedly. "If this endeavour succeeds, if we create a permanent lunar base, and if we have our own sovereignty, then you probably will be involved in creating those laws. If you join now, you will be one of the original members of this organisation. There's a fairly good chance you will be able to help create those laws. But why do you want that?" said Jacob. I think the laws we have in the UK are pretty good. The problem I have is with the barristers who set down the sentences, the liberal airy-fairy pain in the arse, waste of spaces. The sentences that are given out for more serious crimes are not sufficient, whereas a sentence for a lesser crime seems to be punished worse and are out of proportion in some cases. Many sentences can be reduced for good behaviour. What we are doing currently is pathetic. We are too concerned about international opinion. Most of the people we have in power don't have a spine. We should be copying the Australians. They have the right idea, said Nathan passionately. We make people who have done relatively minor crimes do harsh sentences. Then those people that do serious crimes seem to get off relatively lightly. It's just fucking disgusting. Sometimes I think we should adopt the American way of doing things and put a little bit of poison in their veins, said Nathan. Jacob sat back in his chair and took a swig of his beer, giving himself some time to think and study the young-looking man sitting in the chair across from him. At the moment, I can't promise anything. But if you stay part of this organisation, if we succeed, and if the moon base becomes an independent nation, then, and only then, maybe. That's about the best I can do, said Jacob. Then that will have to do, said Nathan. Jacob stood up and reached out across the table to shake Nathan's hand. Nathan stood up and returned the handshake firmly. It's great to have you on board. Spend a few days getting your stuff together and something regarding a plan on what you and we as a group are going to need to do to make this a reality. We'll meet up again quite soon, I think. It will probably be with the rest of the team at that point, said Jacob. Thank you. I'm certainly looking forward to this. And, if nothing else, the train wrecks are going to be interesting. I'll get a few things together and contact you again in a few more days to arrange where to meet up, said Nathan, smiling. Elizabeth and the professor made their way across London to the train station. They were both standing on the platform as the maglev train glided smoothly into the station on its magnetic fields. Follow me, said the professor. The professor made his way onto the train and towards carriage A again. Elizabeth saw where they were going and shook her head. They both sat down at one of the tables. Professor, is this really necessary? Said Elizabeth. We're only going from London to Southampton. I believe it is necessary, my dear, said the professor. Anyway, I have a friend, in fact, several to be honest, and they were able to upgrade us for not that much more, actually. Professor, that's not right, said Elizabeth, sighing. That's the way the world goes round. There's a lot more truth than people like to admit to the old saying, it isn't what you know, it's who you know, said the professor, shrugging. Another aspect is image. Unfortunately, what other people see is important. The image you portray creates a type of expectation, and, unfortunately, depending on what circles you find yourself in, it is a necessary evil. That's a part of the world I've never really agreed with. But given the sort of thing we're going to be getting involved with, I'm probably going to see a lot more of it, aren't I? Said Elizabeth. Yes, my dear. If our endeavour is going to succeed, then yes, you're going to have to deal with people in that way, said the professor. The steward came down the first-class carriage handing out drinks and snacks. Excuse me, but would either of you like anything to eat or drink? Said the steward. No, thank you. I'm okay, said the professor. Can I have a can of Pepsi, please? Said Elizabeth hesitantly. Of course, madam, said the steward. He leaned down and placed a cup with ice, a napkin, and a small can of Pepsi on her table. Is there anything else madam would like? Said the steward. No, thank you, said Elizabeth, blushing. Very well, madam. Have a good day, said the steward. He continued pushing his cart down the train carriage, offering beverages and snacks. I thought you didn't agree with this, said the professor, raising an eyebrow. I don't. But as you said, we will be doing a lot more of this, and there's no point ignoring it, said Elizabeth, still blushing. The train pulled into Southampton station, and the pair of them got up and made their way out of the train station and down to the docks. They made their way down to a pub called the Ship, Chain and Anchor, and went to sit outside. Would you like anything? Said the professor. Can I have a packet of prawn cocktail crisps and another can of Pepsi, please? Said Elizabeth. Another one, said the professor, laughing. I like the taste, said Elizabeth, grinning. While the professor was in the pub getting the snacks and drinks, a young woman came over to Elizabeth's table and sat down across from her. Hello, Elizabeth, it's good to see you again, she said. Before she could say anything else to Elizabeth, the professor came back and placed the drinks and snacks on the table, all the while glancing at the young lady sitting across from Elizabeth. Professor, this is Dr. Samantha Georgina Amelia Bree, but she goes by Sam most of the time, said Elizabeth. It's a pleasure to meet you, Sam, said the professor, shaking her hand. Sam, this is Professor Cameron James Bartholomew Edgar Roberts of Cambridge University, said Elizabeth, gesturing towards the professor. But he generally goes by Professor Roberts, or just Professor. It is a pleasure to meet you, Professor, said Sam, shaking the professor's hand in return. I've just been to get something for Elizabeth here, but would you like anything to eat or drink, my dear? Said the professor. Could I have a Guinness, please? Said Sam. Not a problem, my dear. I'll be back in a moment, said the professor. He went back into the pub, leaving Sam and Elizabeth alone again. I want to leave the nitty-gritty until the professor gets back, but would you sign this in the meantime? Said Elizabeth, reaching for a non-disclosure form and a pen. She slipped both across the table and Sam picked them up. She spent a few minutes reading through them, nodding or frowning from time to time, and then she signed it. The professor returned from the bar with Sam's Guinness, put it on the table and raised an eyebrow when he saw that the non-disclosure agreement had been signed. Sitting down, he said, No problems. None at all so far, said Elizabeth. Why would there be any problems? Said Sam. It's just a non-disclosure form. As long as you don't plan on saying anything too bad, then there's no problem whatsoever. The penalties are a little bit high, but if it's anything that would pique national security interest, they get waived anyway. So basically I have no issues with it. Okay, sounds good to me, and you're right. They do ignore non-disclosure agreements like this if it's in the interest of national security, said Elizabeth. So are you going to tell me why I'm here meeting you on this lovely summer day, or am I going to have to pry it out of you piece by piece? I'm also very curious about what would make such large conditions on a non-disclosure agreement, said Sam. Right, okay. I will warn you now, however, it is a bit of a doozy, said Elizabeth. Jacob and I were watching the new spaceplane launch the other day, which succeeded wonderfully, and we were over the moon that further steps have been taken for humans to get into space. Then there was a terrorist attack, and all the orders bar a few were cancelled. Me and Jacob were devastated, and I, in particular, was disgusted that humans are so stupid sometimes. Jacob said that it wasn't like we could do anything about it, and then I thought, well, why not? Why couldn't we do anything about it? Why couldn't we try ourselves? So me and Jacob went to the professor here, said Elizabeth, gesturing towards the professor. The professor agreed to join us in creating an organisation to get to and create a long-term base on the moon. You want to do what NASA wanted to do back in the 1960s and 1970s, and failed, said Sam. Yeah, pretty much, said Elizabeth. Given all of our backgrounds, we know there is nothing actually stopping us from doing this. Except for other people, financial backing and political support, NASA had the backing of one of the most powerful nations on the planet behind it. Don't forget, said Sam. Exactly. We are stopping ourselves from doing this. Nothing else, said Elizabeth. I don't really keep up to date with what's going on in the world, but even I know that you're painting a target on yourselves. Loads of people are going to come after you, especially the crazies, said Sam, concerned. We know that, and that's why we're doing these non-disclosure agreements. We are also trying to keep a low profile, at least to begin with. We all know that we're going to have to become very public people eventually if this is going to succeed, said Elizabeth. I can probably help you given my background in astronautical engineering. In fact, I can definitely help you, but I'm not sure if I want to become a target, said Sam. The crazies out there have managed to stop massive organisations from doing exactly what you want to do for the past 50 years or more. What makes you think you're going to succeed where they have failed so far? Said Sam. Honestly, I don't know. I feel like I just need to try and do something, said Elizabeth. I can't sit back anymore and watch this disaster continue. There are crazies out there and they have stopped massive organizations, but I still want to try. I can see this obviously means a lot to you, Elizabeth, but it really is incredibly dangerous, said Sam. From what I've heard, the death count has gone up from 3 to 7 people that were in that explosion at the spaceplane facility. I wasn't aware the death count had gone up, but we still want to try, said Elizabeth. The professor nodded slowly and deliberately. Sam first looked at the professor, then back at her friend. The large penalties on the non-disclosure form make a lot more sense now, said Sam. If you succeed, it would be a wonderful thing, and it's exactly what humanity needs. But the danger is pretty damn high, and I don't know if I want that hanging over my head. I tell you what, I'll think about it and get in touch with you in a few days' time. How's that? Well, it will have to do, said Elizabeth. She stood up and the professor joined her. Elizabeth got her phone out of her pocket and tapped it against Sam's. Here are my contact details when you make up your mind, said Elizabeth. One thing I would like to know before you go, said Sam. What sort of role do you want me to have in this organization? I want you to be the chief engineer of the whole kit and caboodle. Everything that is engineering related would be your responsibility, said Elizabeth. Sorry, let me just get this straight. Is it the whole thing? The space side of things or the ground side? Said Sam. To be honest, it is probably the whole thing. But I'd like you to have more involvement with the space side of things. To be honest, I'll leave it up to you, said Elizabeth. You can delegate anyone else you would like. You will be the big boss of the engineering department. Thank you. And no matter what happens, good luck, and I hope you succeed. But try and stay safe, said Sam sincerely. Elizabeth and the professor walked off, leaving Sam to finish her Guinness outside the pub. Once they got out of earshot, the professor said, How come you didn't try any harder? Sam is one of those engineers. She will analyze it down to the ground and make a decision based upon the facts. When she said she would think about it, she did honestly mean it. I'm just glad she didn't say no there and then, said Elizabeth. We're not having much luck so far with the recruitment process, said the professor sourly. The next stop is Germany, but at this point, I'm holding my hopes out for your friends in the States, said Elizabeth, sighing. Now on to the airport and then Germany. A day later, Elizabeth and the professor found themselves at the top of the tower in St. Michael's Church, leaning against the battlements looking out over the port of Hamburg and the bridge that spanned the harbour. That is an amazing view, isn't it? Said a person coming up the stone steps. Elizabeth turned to them. Fritz, it's good to see you again. It's been too long. Indeed it has, Elizabeth, said Fritz. Before we get started with anything, Fritz, I need to ask you to sign this document. It's just a typical non-disclosure agreement, said Elizabeth. The professor and Elizabeth shielded the wind with their bodies as she got the document out of her satchel. Thank you, said Fritz. He then took the non-disclosure agreement off Elizabeth and read through it quickly but thoroughly. He looked up from the non-disclosure agreement at Elizabeth and raised an eyebrow. He then shrugged and signed it and handed it back, and Elizabeth put it back in her satchel. Okay, why have I just signed that? Said Fritz. They all leaned against the rough stone of the parapet, looking out over the river and the bridge crossing it. What do you think about humans colonizing the moon? Said Elizabeth. I think it would be wonderful, but after the Apollo program, no one has really pushed hard enough for it, said Fritz. Would you like to join an organization that would push for it? Said Elizabeth. Why would you succeed where others have failed? Said Fritz. We may not. We may fail at it, but I want to at least try, said Elizabeth. They continued looking out over the bay for some time. Fritz tapped his foot and then brushed his hand across the rough stone of the parapet. At the moment, I have nothing better to do, so why not? I'll help you with your project, at least for the time being, said Fritz. That's quick. Do you not need more time to think about it? Said Elizabeth. I don't really have anything else on at ESA at the moment, and I'm not really doing much. If you succeed, it would be a wonderful thing, said Fritz. Anyway, Even if you don't succeed, it will give me something to do for a couple of weeks or months. You do realize, though, the chances of you succeeding are minimal. We know, but we want to try anyway, said Elizabeth. I admire your ambition, said Fritz. What would you actually like me to do, though, in this harebrained idea of yours? I'd like you to manage things here in Germany, as well as lobby the German and European governments for a change in the law regarding space entrepreneurship. If you can use your connections with the European Space Agency to help in any way, that would also be appreciated. I'd also like your help with the design of both the ship we want to use to get to the moon and the moon base itself, said Elizabeth. Fritz nodded slowly, continuing to look out over the bay. I'd be willing to do that, but you're probably also going to need someone from Russia involved, said Fritz. Why Russia? Said Elizabeth. Russia was one of the 3 major countries that signed the space treaty. They have some of the best training facilities for astronauts in the world, and they still launch regular missions to the International Space Station, said Fritz. You're right, I hadn't thought of them, said Elizabeth, slapping her forehead. Damn the Ruskies, said the professor, slapping the stone parapet. I completely forgot all about them. We were even competing against them in the Apollo program. Stupid, stupid me. It's okay, Professor. That's why we're building a team. They're hopefully going to think of all the other things we done Hans at. However, there are also things we are all going to miss, but I just hope we catch them in time, said Elizabeth. She then turned back to Fritz. Thank you for joining us. We'll get back to you in a couple more days over a secure internet link. Not a problem. I shall speak to you in a couple of days' time. What will you be doing in the meantime? Said Fritz. We're off to the States, to try and round up the last members of the core team, hopefully, but we haven't had much luck so far, said Elizabeth. To be honest, I'm not surprised. This is a mad endeavour and has very little chance of actually succeeding, said Fritz. That, say, very glass is half-empty sort of outlook, wouldn't you say? I know the odds are long, but I believe it's worth trying, said Elizabeth. I certainly believe it's worth following her, said the professor, turning away from the parapet towards the other 2. Thank you, Professor. I appreciate the vote of confidence, said Elizabeth, before returning her attention to Fritz. We will speak to you soon. Okay. I shall speak to you both then in the near future, said Fritz. Elizabeth and the professor made their way down the stone steps and then across the city to the airport. Before they realized it, they were on a plane to the States. The 2 of them fell asleep for most of the trip and found themselves making their way through the airport on the other side quicker than they were expecting. I think I have spent more time travelling in the last couple of days than anything else, said Elizabeth. Yes, we've spent rather a long time travelling recently, said the professor tiredly, but I may be able to help a little bit. What do you mean, Professor? I assume you mean us meeting your friends, and aren't we meeting your friends in 3 different places? Said Elizabeth, trying to hold back a yawn. No, sir. I managed to get in touch with them and asked them if they could meet us all together. There were a few problems, but they managed in the end, said the professor, now also trying to hold back a yawn of his own. That's fantastic. Where are we meeting them? Said Elizabeth. Once we come out of the airport here, we just go down the road there, said the professor, pointing down the street as they walked out of the airport. Where? Said Elizabeth, shielding her eyes with her hand. That place over there, the one with the purple and green signpost, said the professor. That is truly a ghastly colour scheme, said Elizabeth, laughing. The pair of them made their way over to a cafe and sat down at one of the outside tables. They watched the people scurrying past for a moment before a waitress came out and said, Do you have a reservation? Yes, we do. It's under Roberts, said the professor. The lady looked down at her notepad, flicking at the screen with her stylus a few times, and then said, Ah, yes, you're right here. Would you like an indoor or outdoor table? An outdoor table with an umbrella, if possible, said the professor. Of course. Please come this way, sir and madam, said the waitress. The pair of them stood up again and moved to one with an umbrella. Would you like any beverages or food while you're waiting? Said the waitress. Could I have a Pepsi, please, and a plate of chips? said Elizabeth. The professor glanced at Elizabeth, raising an eyebrow before saying, "Can I have some iced tea, please?" "Not a problem, I'll be back in a moment," said the waitress. She turned around and walked back inside. "A plate of chips?" said the professor curiously. "What can I say? I'm hungry, and I don't like airline food," said Elizabeth. "That's fair enough. Do you mind if I share them with you?" "I'm somewhat peckish myself," said the professor. "Not at all," said Elizabeth. The pair of them waited in companionable silence until the waitress came back. The waitress placed the drinks on the table along with a plate and a packet of crisps. The professor raised one eyebrow and looked over towards Elizabeth. "On second thoughts, I think I'll let you have them," said the professor. A moment later, 3 other people arrived. The 3 new people took seats at the table with Elizabeth and the professor, and the waitress took their drinks order as well. "Elizabeth, the man to your left is Dr. Charles Marks, MD, and a PhD of astronautical medicine," said the professor. "Next to him is Dr. David Stevens, PhD, but the important thing is he's a real live astronaut. The third and final man is Jack Breccia, our technical expert in anything IT, software, artificial intelligence, and, in short, anything that involves electronics and software," said the professor. "It's a pleasure to meet you," said David in a honeyed southern drawl. The other 2 nodded in greeting before Jack turned to the professor. "Okay, you've managed to get us all here in one place at the same time, which is a minor miracle. What exactly is the purpose of this minor miracle?" Elizabeth reached into her bag and got out 3 copies of the non-disclosure agreement. She passed them to the 3 newcomers. "What the hell is this?" said Jack. "It's a typical non-disclosure agreement, but I warn you that there are some pretty hefty fines in there if you spill the beans," said Elizabeth. "Wow, you're not joking," said Charles. "You're definitely not joking. Literally ridiculous," said Jack in exasperation. "Sign them and we will tell you. After all, that is why you be here, isn't it? If not, you're free to leave. There's the door," said Elizabeth, gesturing. "Is she actually serious, Professor?" said David, seeming amused. "Oh yes, she is very serious. And I would do what she said if I was you," said the professor. "Okay, Elizabeth," said David, signing the non-disclosure agreement. "Pass me one of those forms as well," said Charles. "You're mad. You're both mad, but if you 2 are doing it, so must I suppose," said Jack, sighing. The 3 men returned the signed non-disclosure agreements, and Elizabeth put them back in her satchel. "Okay, we would like you 3 to join an organisation that intends setting up and running a self-sustaining permanent moon base," said Elizabeth. "What the hell? This has got to be a joke," said Jack, laughing. "So many people and organisations have failed. It's ridiculous." "Shut up, Jack, and let's hear what the lady has to say," said David, glaring at Jack, before then turning back towards Elizabeth. "But he has got a point. Are you actually being serious?" "I'm being as serious as a heart attack. This is something we are going to try and achieve," said Elizabeth. "Professor, have they really got a chance?" said David, just as seriously. "Let me put it this way, dear boy. I'm part of the group. And yes, I think they have got a chance. More than that, in actual fact. I think they have a better chance than most," said the professor. "Not to doubt you," said David, glancing at Elizabeth. "But are you absolutely sure, Professor?" "Yes, I am very sure," said the professor. "Wow, okay. There is so much we need to get sorted," said David. "Whoa! What? Wait," said Jack. "We never said we were in." "Well, I'm in, but it's up to the pair of you on what you want to do," said David, sitting back in his chair and crossing his arms. "At the moment I've got other responsibilities, and I will only be able to do this part-time. But once I've finished those projects I might be able to devote more time to this, and it does seem pretty interesting," said Charles. "You 2 are mad, but if you 2 are in then so am I," said Jack, sighing. "Really? Are you all in? And are you absolutely sure?" said Elizabeth. All 3 of the men nodded in full agreement. "Okay, We're going to make our way back to the UK, and I'll contact you in a few days' time. At that point, you can meet the rest of the team and we can start making plans on what to do," said Elizabeth, getting her phone out and transferring her contact details to the 3 newest members of the team. Then Elizabeth and the professor stood up and made their way back to the airport. "That went a lot better than I was expecting, but another 8-hour flight back." "Bloody hell," said Elizabeth, shaking her head. "At least we've got 3 more people on the team," said the professor with a shrug.